Good evening, everyone. We'll get started here in just a couple of minutes. Welcome, everyone.
Hey, Dan.
Glad to see you back, Ann.
Thank you. Glad to be back. I appreciate everyone's patience.
And hopefully we won't have to have unexpected visitors as we did last time. In a couple of minutes here, just to be on the safe side, I'll enable the waiting room so that if something does happen, I'll see if someone does come in, I'll have the ability to admit them quickly, and if necessary, kick them out. That at the last meeting, that was a very unfortunate experience. So we do have a quorum here. Tom, good to see you. Trust that your earlier meeting was good. Thank you for the notice on that. And I believe Bob Vincent will be joining us. He, as our liaison, he may be a couple minutes late, and he's not talking a whole lot today as he's undergone some medical treatment. So, and can we have you take the minutes for today?
Sure.
Okay, excellent. Tim, you're off the hook for tonight. So anyone from the public who wishes to say anything, perhaps Tom, or not?
Hey, Dan, Paul Cancelleri, just here to kind of listen and learn.
Okay.
Chair of the Veterans Advisory Board. I think we'd like to become a member of Chapter 9 in the process. That's what I'm kind of leaning on here.
Okay, excellent. Welcome. And we will get into Chapter 9 in that discussion in a few minutes, and absolutely interested in your comments on it. So unlike some other meetings, this tends to be a collaborative effort. And so we encourage you to join in as we go ahead and discuss those pieces.
Thank you.
Okay, so for minutes, we actually have two sets of minutes to approve. One set has not yet been submitted fully. I'm chasing those down from the person who had said that they would draft them. And since they have not been submitted to us, we can approve the minutes of August 15th. And if necessary, we can recreate those just by going through the actual video, and we may need to do that to have someone, an alternate, go through it. Not necessarily the most fun activity to have to listen to these meetings afterwards. Going through them once is fun, twice not so much. But it is something that we'll get to that. If necessary, I may ask for assistance on that. I'll ask for that offline. So that brings us to September 19th minutes. Tim did a great job of taking minutes. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. There were a couple of changes, I believe, that had been proposed. Tim, you sent me an updated copy that has not been distributed. If you just want to go over the changes for those, since they seem to be largely administrative.
Yeah, there were two changes from the version I circulated a couple days ago. One just putting the time of the adjournment of the meeting at like 8:49, and then changing the last just to note it was a roll call and not the number of the 7-0 vote. But those are the only two changes from the version I circulated.
Okay, and those are actually both important elements just for consistency with open meeting law, since they are roll call votes. Since we're doing remote meetings, all votes must be by roll call. And so just indicating that becomes an element of the minutes. So much appreciated. Any other comments on the minutes themselves? Do we have a motion to approve the minutes with the two amendments?
I make a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting as amended.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve the minutes of September 19th with the two
19th,
amendments. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay.
Okay, so motion made by Joe, seconded by Tim. Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all in favor, this needs to be by roll call. So I'm going to just go around the order that I have people on my screen. Anne.
I must abstain because I was not present.
Okay, we've got one abstention. Joe?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Tim?
Yes.
Catherine?
Yes.
Lucy?
I was also not present. Do I have to abstain?
You do not.
Oh, okay. Well,
You can vote. It is purely optional as to when you choose to abstain, especially with the ability to watch the meeting. But the minutes are the legal recording of it. So it's a matter of there's no harm in it in the abstention either in this case. So I will vote in favor. That gives us five in favor, 0 against, 2 abstentions. With that, moving on to Chapter 9, Boards, Committees, and Commissions. As we get started here, Tom, have you gotten any updates or feedback from any other boards, from anyone on Chapter 9?
No.
Okay. So with that, we have received a little bit of feedback from the Veterans Advisory Board. Paul, glad that you can join us on this, which was the consideration as to whether to add articles to specifically add in the Veterans Advisory Board as a separate section for this. And when we got that request by email, I responded to it along with Bob Vincent, who happens to be the liaison to both committees and also a veteran himself. So just encouraging that any submissions come before us with reason and specificity. And I know that Bob will certainly watch this section later if he's not able to join during it. So it's one of those things that I appreciate his assistance.
Yeah. I don't have, I just think it should be listed. The term public body confused me. But I think Bob Vincent came back and basically said that this is the Veterans Advisory Board is actually a multi-member body, and it ought to be listed under Chapter 9, and we should follow those, that protocol and that process to get listed. We've been in existence since 2012. We are currently writing our first set of bylaws. We don't have a set of bylaws right now, which is another reason why I feel that this is important, because we have to write something and put something together that maps to the town charter. And I'm trying to figure out which part of the Chapter 9 we're mapping to.
Excellent feedback. Tom, do you have any thoughts that you'd like to help with Paul on some of these issues? Because I have a feeling that you may end up getting involved here.
I think you're making it too complicated. I don't think you need a set of bylaws. And I don't understand what you'd be trying to accomplish by drafting one.
Well, Tom, I think the bylaws would simply point out the intended purpose and powers of the duties of the body, the terms of membership for each member, and then how the successor members shall be appointed, the minimum. I agree with you.
But you can't establish that stuff yourself. It's the body that creates your entity that determines those things.
Right, and I think that the body that creates the entity points to Chapter 115, Chapter 12 of the State House, that entitles us to have to be in existence with the town.
I'm sorry, you're saying that there's a state statute that authorizes the creation locally of this committee.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's fine. But who appointed your members? I think it was the town council.
Town council appoints the members, yes.
Yeah. So if there are going to be any rules about things like what kind of person can be appointed, who, when they get appointed, what terms they serve, that sort of thing, it would be either in the statute or it would be the town council CIL that would establish those things. You can't bootstrap yourself into setting up your own qualifications.
Oh, and again, I'm not trying, that's not the intent.
Yeah, but I've talked to Bob about this before, and I just think that it's making too much of the procedure. And I think you should probably spend your time focusing on the substance of what you want, what you really care about, which is helping veterans.
Okay. Again, it's a learning process for me. I do feel that there should be a simple set of bylaws. When I say simple, less than one page.
Well,
because there's nothing for transition. That was my.
I don't want to make too much of this, but the other issue is at the level of municipal government in Massachusetts, bylaws is a defined term. It means the laws that are passed by town meeting that govern the town. So you would not actually be creating bylaws. You would be creating regulations of your committee.
It could be listed as a standard operating procedure.
However you want to call it.
Okay.
And so on that point, Tom, where would you recommend that the Veterans Advisory Board go for assistance to help get those standard operating procedures or regulations drafted and get guidance on those?
So I don't mean to sound hostile to this at all. I'm more than happy to assist. So if you, Paul, or Bob, or anybody wants to talk to me about what you would be looking for, or to give me an outline of what you're hoping for, I'd be happy to, put it into the turgid legalese that defines my life.
Okay.
All right.
I think the best way to do this, Dan, would probably be to work directly with Bob Vincent and then take it to town council. I don't, and my intent here is not to make something very complicated. I just would like it we don't have anything documented. And I think there needs to be something documented. One example do you need to be a veteran to be on the Veterans Advisory Board? And the answer is no, you don't need to be a veteran to be on the Veterans Advisory Board.
I think those are great points. I think the idea of having standard operating procedures, probably regulations from a legalistic perspective, I'm not sure of that. I leave that to Tom to figure out. I think makes a lot of sense so that there is a clarity of expectations for people who are both on the Veterans Advisory Board, those who may be interested in it, and those who are looking to understand what the Veterans Advisory Board is doing. So the purpose, the ideas, the concepts, the goals are very clear, and those will actually have the ability to withstand the test of time. As people come and go on the board itself, having things documented becomes really helpful. And to Tom's point, I think that to work with Bob, work with Tom, both incredibly good lawyers in their own right, will end up with a product that you can really be proud of and will serve the veterans of our community really well. So the bylaws themselves, we go before anything that comes out of our committee goes before town meeting. And then we get up in front of town meeting, say a few things, and then have a discussion at town meeting about, okay, should the town adopt it or not? That's a short, very short version of what happens, as opposed to something that becomes internal, but public in the sense that it can and should be published, particularly to the website for the Veterans Advisory Board and on the town website. So the information can become available. And then if it needs to evolve, you'll have the ability to evolve it internally as well, because the needs of veterans are likely to continue to evolve too. Because you don't want to have to go back before town meeting. It's a long process, not necessarily painful.
No, it's just
emotionally, but
it just
it's
takes
a long
time.
process.
Yeah, no, it takes time. And
So-
like I said, like I shared, we are tied to the Mass General Laws, Chapter 115, Section 12, which is what allows us to be in existence.
So excellent. The other piece is that all of the bylaws of the town apply to the Veterans Advisory Board. The ones that I would
Yes.
just take note of, and I'm quite confident Bob will make sure that you're aware of, is sections in Chapter 9 is sections 15 through 27, particularly 19 through 27, because that's where it talks about the different ways that things are advertised, things are put on boards, people are appointed to boards, and then how the boards themselves operate.
Okay.
So sections 19 through 27 is specific on the governance itself to have some consistency across the town. But within the Veterans Advisory Board, you can adopt additional procedures or alternate procedures to a large degree, as long as they're documented in a way that is and then voted upon by the members. That should be acceptable and allow you to do the service that's really important.
I don't disagree.
So excellent. And if you have thoughts on anything that's in 19 through 27, we are absolutely all ears to that as well. It talks about everything from the rules of order and how chairs get assigned to things that are mundane but important, like how many people are required for a quorum. And then where meetings have to be, how we handle the location and postings of meetings, minutes, things along those lines. But one thing that may become important for your committee, as it is for many, is the attendance requirement and automatic abandonment clause. A lot of people aren't aware of that yet, but if someone misses 5 consecutive meetings, then they've deemed abandoned their appointment. And they can reapply when it gets advertised, but that's something that if someone isn't there, but there are ways to address that and mitigate that in the middle as well. As long as someone attends, it doesn't have to be in person, it can be by phoning into a meeting. That qualifies to reset the clock, so to speak.
I have no further questions. So thank you very much, Dan. I appreciate it. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. And we've signed Tom up to help you. So you're going to, you have the ability to have access to truly amongst the best legal counsel in the state.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt.
So you have a very tangible, positive outcome from this meeting. Tom unfortunately means that he gets a little bit less time walking the dog, but he'll be okay with that. The dog may not be.
Yeah, be happy to help.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay. The other piece with chapter 9 is in the discussions I've had with the town administrator, Steve Mayo, is that we've agreed to keep this item on the agenda at least through the next meeting as a regular item in case other boards have feedback. The idea being that when we open this topic up in August, a lot of boards had not had the opportunity to meet. He and his assistant Sherry Dalton sent notices out to the chairs of all of the committees. As far as I know, that was what they'd stated. All of the appointed boards and committees that they are responsible for requesting feedback. So it was very, very specific request, and I will request that they send another note out in case someone either overlooked it or they just hadn't gotten to it. And if feedback comes back at a later time, we will revisit it at that point as well. So that's just where we are on chapter 9. I don't think that we have anything ready in terms of updates from you, Tom, for that, any articles or anything.
No.
Okay. We've got some time before we have to get to a town meeting that we're going to be presenting now. It's not going to be November. Not this November anyways.
Mhm.
Okay. With that, we've got chapter 36. Meetings, which we'll jump to in just a moment. I do want to address something that has come up just in the last couple of days. So I don't anticipate that we will take any action on it. It was after the meeting was posted, and that is that the planning board apparently has started drafting a bylaw. They have it on their website, which anyone is welcome to read, about street renumbering, street names and numbers, and the process by which to go through that. I have reached out to the chair of the planning board to ask if they wanted to collaborate on that so that there is not confusion as it relates to the recodification process and exercise that we are likely to undertake shortly. So I've reached out. I have not heard back on that, but just want to make everyone aware that that's out there as another bylaw that's being proposed. And if you want to read the current languages that they have proposed, you can go to the town website under the planning board. Tom, did you have any part in writing that one?
Yes, I have. I forget whether I wrote it or just commented on a draft that they did, but yeah, I have.
Okay, so you're familiar with it.
Yep.
And part of the reason why I ask is just in my cursory reading of it, by the time it comes back to this board for at least comment, there will probably be quite a few comments on it, just given the nature of the language. It looks like it was adapted from another community, just at first blush. So that's my thinking on that. That's part of the zoning piece. So I don't see it as needing to be discussed in any sort of depth at this meeting. But if people weren't aware of it, if you didn't notice that in the paper, just want to make sure that everyone knows that that is an issue that's out there. Once you're on bylaws, people think you know everything about every bylaw. The only person that actually applies to is Tom. Secondary application is to Anne, and to a lesser extent me from my prior service. And all three of us are probably like, yeah, no. That's what Google and searches are for. Okay, chapter 36. For this, I will do the screen sharing. Chapter 36 for meetings themselves. This is mostly about town meeting, but it applies to any other general meetings as well, is my reading of it. But most of this really is related to how town meeting operates. I have reached out to our town moderator, asked him for feedback, have not received anything yet. He may come back with changes at a future time. He was pretty clear that he thought there may be some changes, but he was not specific as to what they were. Any questions as we get started?
I had raised my hand. I'm sorry, Dan.
Okay.
I just had actually a point about the first section 1, but please go on and I can make it.
Okay, so with that, let's talk about section 1. Last amended in 2018. Town election shall be held on the last Tuesday of April in each year. The town meeting will be, other than the town officers, will be held by ballot. What this really is saying is my understanding from the way that this is worded is that the town election is technically a part of the town meeting for reasons that I believe the town barrister can probably give us based on law, which reminds me, Barrister Mullen, I believe you are missing the powdered wig requirement.
And the robe. And the robe.
And the robe. But my understanding is that the section 1 here really just has to do with the way that the municipal law is written, because the election is a part of the town meeting from a technical perspective.
That's right. This all points back to our colonial roots, where annually all of the men in the area who owned property would come together and they would vote first on who to elect selectmen and, hogreave and so forth. And then they'd settle down to the business of the meeting and deal with things like who to sell property to or how much to set for taxes.
And the way that this is set up is that the town meeting is on a very specific day, which is the first Monday after the election, although that is not always the date that is actually in practice that is chosen by the town council.
And
So
Dan, sorry.
Sorry.
Could I jump in for just a
Yeah.
second on that point?
Mhm.
I was talking with town administrator, and I remember when I was on town council having to do somewhat gymnastics when we could not hold a meeting per the bylaws. And so Steve and I were wondering, is there a way to generalize it, not make it so specific so that it doesn't have to go to a vote of town council to change it? Do you know what I'm saying, Tom? I remember we had this issue.
Well, I was thinking, how about this? Just strike the end of section 1, starting with the evening of the first Monday.
Yeah.
And replace it with a date selected pursuant to the charter. Because the charter makes clear that the town council can determine within a certain period of time when the annual town meeting will occur. And it's always been awkward to me that we have this bylaw which purports to set a definite date.
Yeah. I think that's a great suggestion.
Is there any negative side of that? Is there a requirement at all to have a specific date referenced as to when the meeting will be? Because I believe the charter says that it's at a date set in the bylaws, as long as it's within 30 days of a fixed time.
Yeah, so the charter says the annual town meeting shall be held within 30 days of the first Monday in April. Said date to be determined by the town council. And so that means, yeah, we definitely have to have it. We definitely have to have it by a particular deadline, but it can be chosen by the town council within that range. And I think it makes sense to either say nothing then about the date of the annual town meeting in the bylaws, or to just reflect back to what the charter says.
So there's no requirement that we specify when it occurs.
No.
Well, there is a requirement that it be somewhere, and it is in the charter, so I don't think you need it in the bylaws.
I like the idea of referencing back to the bylaws. It just gives, someone a point of information. But limiting it to that first Monday has caused us to change that date quite a bit if there was an issue with it. So I like Tom's suggestion that simply says, brought before the town at a meeting pursuant to the charter, which still holds us to having the town meeting within a date certain post the first election. Or the April election.
Is there any issue with changing the language to say something that shall be brought before the town at a meeting to be held at a time specified in the town charter? So we actually just leave it to the town charter for when that is.
Yeah, at a date selected pursuant to the charter.
I think that would kind of
Yep.
simplify it without having confusion between the dates.
I think that's perfect.
Others thoughts?
So I just pulled up the town charter on my screen, and it says said date for the annual town meeting should be held within 30 days of the first Monday in April, or in such date as may from time to time be fixed in the bylaws of the town. So does that mean if we strike this wording that it has to be held within the first 30 days from April 1st?
Well, it would have to be held within 30 days of the first Monday in April. Yeah.
Okay.
And
So
we
there's still that limiting factor.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Which is good.
you want to have a deadline, and the charter gives us a deadline.
And if there is a need to change it in the future, the charter still says that the bylaws can specify a date. So what we're doing is we're removing it for now, but if there was a need to specify it in the future, it could be that, okay, the town meeting must occur sometime prior to May 15th or prior to May 30th. Just as an example, would give us the ability at a future time to create a bylaw in that case. But I don't see it. I'm not hearing that there's a need to do that at this point. Erica, I believe you have your hand up. If you can come off mute. Okay, you're off mute, Eric. Can't hear you at the moment. I know Eric has had some technical difficulties with Zoom from time to time. If Eric, if you want to communicate the issue another way, welcome to send that to me as an email to the bylaw review committee address, and if I get it during the meeting, I'll certainly read it. If you're able to get the microphone working, then by all means, feel free to speak up as well. And for what it's worth, I'm actually keeping that window open separately on my computer, just in case something should pop up over there. Okay, that brings us over to notice. Notice shall be posting the attested copy over 2 successive Sundays. It's always based on Sundays, and in Massachusetts and publishing it in newspapers. The first thing that comes to mind here is we may want to also put a requirement that it be posted prominently on the town website as well. Especially with the declining adoption of the local town newspaper. Thoughts?
We did that for a similar one in the past, so I feel like for consistency's sake, it makes sense to do it here as well.
Tom, is that something we can assign to you?
Sure.
Any other issues with section 2?
I know historically the town council always posted a copy at the library or left a copy at the public library. I don't know that that needs to be included because I'm sure future town councils will do that, but that's something that's always added to this.
I wonder if that's one of the places that they've designated.
I'm sure it is, yeah. So I think that captures it for the town council to move to post it at the library. So that's fine.
Other comments, thoughts? Moving forward, order of procedure. All articles shall be taken up in the order of their arrangement unless otherwise decided by a 2/3 vote. The arrangement itself is something that I think is a closely held secret as to how that gets determined, with one exception, which is budget is always first. Other than the budget being always first, the arrangement I think is largely determined by the town administrator. There are a few things that happen in a pretty consistent order, but the idea here is things can be taken out of order and does happen from time to time. There is the piece that we may want to put in here is a consent agenda as to allow that by right so that it doesn't require a 2/3 vote for those to technically be out of order of precedence. Thoughts?
Dan, my only thought is that we know that some people come to town meeting for specific votes. And I just wonder if you can move around articles by right. Could that, as opposed to folks voting, I mean, I can see the good and bad of that, but that's one issue I could see. So I'm making myself clear.
So for example, there may be a town meeting where there's a request for a debt exclusion for, say, a large school that may need to be funded.
Perhaps.
Just as a purely hypothetical example,
Right.
that may occur sometime over the course of the next 45 days or so. And for people who are coming to the meeting for that, are you suggesting that there be another effectively easier process? Because that might be, say, Article 14 of 17. I have no idea how many articles they're planning for the fall town meeting, but the idea being, if that's, say, Article 14, that there's a way that people can move it up easier.
Or that if we decide that it's just a matter of right, that's putting the decision for that kind of impactful vote to just lie with one person. And I'm not sure, if I don't know if that could cause any issues if one person had the ability to move articles. Typically, it wouldn't matter unless we have one of those large articles. you know, we have a moderator who's very thoughtful and would know how to run the procedure, but I always think about the what ifs. Tom, do you think it's a problem having it as a matter of right, or 2/3 vote makes more sense?
Well, by a matter of right, you mean by a majority vote?
Dan used the term, I'm sorry, Dan, I should let you explain it.
It would be more of if you were to make it a matter of right, it would be some other process to move an article. There could be a majority vote or other mechanism, because part of the idea of the warrant is that people know what the items are. They can try to time things. There's no
Right.
absolute predictability. That's by design, but it gives people an idea of, at least quite literally, they're warned what is going to be discussed. It does not, the idea behind this particular bylaw, as I read it, is to make it so that people know approximately what the order of topics will be. But if something's going to be taken out of order, it requires a supermajority to be able to be done. But it does actually give a right for it to be done. So the moderator can't say, no, we're going to wait on that because he doesn't like the presentation of who's there.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I mean, a majority vote makes it easier because 2/3 vote has to be counted.
With the exception of unanimous, which is rare, but
Yeah.
yes.
Exactly. Yep.
So I guess I incline toward thinking this is a good bylaw as is. I can tell you that it's typical of most bylaws that govern town meetings in other towns. The thinking being that you want to give people some degree of predictability about when articles are going to be considered, but obviously you don't want it calcified. You want to give some opportunity for discretion. If, for example, you know, you don't want necessarily to be paying some high-paid consultant to sit there for 2 hours before his article gets up before the meeting. So basically your options, I think, are either say there's no change, there's no changing the order, or the order would be changed by a majority vote or by a super majority, which is what we've got here, or you vested in the discretion of some individual, typically, or not typically, because I've never seen it done, but conceivably the moderator. So I'm in favor of the status quo for what it's worth.
Eric, did you want to did you have anything to contribute here? Did you want to try your microphone again? We're unfortunately still not able to hear you. So with Tom, just as a matter of law, would there be a need to put in something in this section that talks about the need, that talks about the exception automatically allowed for anything on a consent agenda? Because those are by definition taken out of, they're taken out of order.
Yeah, I suppose you could have a provision here about the consent agenda. We've been dealing with it on a more ad hoc basis.
And my thinking on this is, if someone wants to discuss any item of a consent agenda in more depth, instead of having to object to the consent agenda itself, which then aborts the entirety of the consent agenda, technically, this would allow that item to be excluded and the rest of the consent agenda to continue, without having to then have a 2/3 vote for the consent agenda to be taken out of order and then having those items. And while in process, it hasn't required all that many votes, it hasn't taken that many. I think codifying it will make it much clearer and make it safer for the moderator to have a consent agenda. And it may just be something as simple as adding in items in the consent agenda can be taken out of order without, can be taken out of order as part of consent agenda unless there is any objection to an individual or anyone that any individual objection, those items are excluded or something along those lines. I'm not quite sure what the wording would be, but if someone objects to an article, it should be put back into its place, so to speak. If someone wants to talk about the annual taking of land for $1 for easements, just as one of the items that often is put into a consent agenda, if I recall correctly. I know we're in the weeds here for everyone here, but this is how the town meetings get run. We have seen the importance of town meeting cannot be overstated. We have seen several times where things have passed or failed by a single vote. In the last 20 years, there have been some very important votes that have literally passed or failed by a single vote. So having clarity of this becomes important. It also should help keep Tom out of having to go to Superior Court for these issues as well, which I know he's had to do for Wakefield. So thoughts on adding in a section for the consent agenda?
I mean, if it makes it go more smoothly when that gets raised, that makes sense. If you could just give me the language, or I can suggest, Tom, you can polish up what we throw out there.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how we would word it. It might just be the second half of 36.3.
Okay.
The first would say the articles are printed in the order in which they're going to be taken up, unless there's a 2/3 vote to the contrary. And then got to say something about a consent agenda. I can't remember seeing articles, bylaws in other towns about it, but there must be.
It's directly related to the next bylaw, which is the rules of conduct or the rules of procedure itself, which it has to do with everything being done through Robert's Rules of Order, which does allow for consent agenda. And I think that for us to explicitly mention it, because where you now have a technical conflict between Robert's rules and the bylaws, in that if we remove that conflict, it makes it very clear that consent agendas are expected, because they're fairly new in Wakefield. They've only been done for the last couple of years. So I'll take a look at some language. If others have attempts at language, feel free, and we can pass it on to Tom to hopefully do some amazing legalese and put it into, how do you put that? The wonders of legalese that govern your life?
Turgid legalese.
Yes. So the more turgid that people can write, the better. Kevin, are you up for writing with turgidity? Your word of the day. Okay. This brings us to 36.4, rules of conduct. Every person shall stand, be recognized by the moderator and speak, shall respectfully address the moderator, shall confine himself to the question under debate and avoid all personalities.
Does avoid all personalities have like a understood meaning? Because to me, I don't know what that means.
I can tell you what it means in practice.
Sure.
I'm not sure of the legal. It means that someone by the bylaws it should not stand up in town meeting and say, this particular bylaw is absolutely awful. Catherine wrote it, and I don't like Catherine, so therefore we shouldn't vote on this. So the idea of being keep discussion to the question, not the people behind the question.
Aha, gotcha.
discussion.
Okay.
There are personalities at town meeting, people who make themselves more well known at town meeting. I'm trying to be very politically correct here and accurate at the same time, without meaning anything bad, because I genuinely don't. Anyone who has the ability to speak at town meeting, I have the utmost of respect for, even if I don't like what they have to say. The fact that someone is willing to speak in front of hundreds of townspeople means a lot. So that, I think that that's what it's really trying to get to, is so that the moderator has a basis for shutting down a conversation that's about, I don't like this person, or something along those lines. Or if there becomes a discussion that is, someone tries to bring up something that is truly off topic. So there's a discussion about a school and someone says, oh, well, I don't want to talk about, I don't want us to spend money on the school because we spent money on taking the land from Lonnie Island, to bring up a debate from almost 20 years ago. And those types of things, this gives the moderator a basis for saying, we're not going to have that discussion. They have the ability to interrupt the speaker at that point. That's my understanding of it.
Dan, this is a very small point, but my disabilities in me. Every person shall stand if able.
Thank you. I was going to go there as well. I totally appreciate that. I want to figure out shall stand or other. I'm thinking shall stand or otherwise
Be recognized.
or otherwise make known their request to be recognized, because the purpose of standing is so that people can see who's speaking.
Mhm. Or otherwise make known their, every person shall stand or otherwise make known their desire to speak, or no?
What about just raise their hand? I mean, is that?
Yeah.
We probably want them, if possible, to like get to the, I would think, get to the microphone.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we don't actually address here what their posture is when they're speaking. We just say they have to get the moderator's attention. So I
Yeah.
think every person shall stand or raise his hand
Yeah.
covers it. pretty
Okay,
well.
perfect.
What about name and address? Does that, I mean, we talked about this at the last meeting. Do they have to speak their name and address, or are we leaving that out? I know we talked about that the last meeting. Maybe they don't want to be recognized. Maybe they don't want to give their address, but I don't know.
That's actually not in the bylaws that I'm aware of
Yeah.
as a requirement. That's a local practice.
Mhm.
It's pretty uniform.
Yeah, I like it.
In most towns, you'd have to get up and state your name and at least the street you live on. Yeah, if not the street and number.
Where it's not addressed here, I think that if someone anticipates the situation where they may speak and doesn't want to give that information, the onus in some ways is on them to have a conversation with the moderator in advance.
Yeah.
Because it's not a requirement that be done by bylaw. The moderator, I think, would be given the discretion as to how to handle that particular situation. That's my reading for that. I know as a matter of practice for hearings and so forth, that's something that the chair does have the ability to do, is to either require or not.
I just have a question, Tom, on the language. Every person shall stand or raise their hand. Maybe I'm just going to something that won't happen, but I picture a bunch of people sitting in their seats just raising their hands, which will be a little bit administratively unwieldy if they don't want to come up and stand at the microphone, which I think is important when you're addressing the body.
Yeah. But don't we do this already? I mean, there are people who just sit in their seats and they raise their hand until the moderator recognizes them.
I can't remember that. I can't remember that happening, Tom.
I can only remember one case where a person did not have the ability to move quickly, and so the microphone was brought to them.
Right.
Uh-huh.
I remember that. It was a number of years ago. It was in the old Galvin.
Okay. So I'm sorry, Ann, how would you want to do this?
So I just think it could be a little unwieldy if we allow people to sit in their seats and raise their hands to speak.
Mhm.
So I wonder, can you say something like every person shall stand if able, or it's the next word I'm looking for. If not, raise their hand to be recognized by the moderator and speak.
Okay.
Would it perhaps be easier to state, I'm thinking where the goal of this is accommodations, that if accommodations are needed, they can, if accommodations are needed to, they will be provided if requested in advance, something along those lines. So again, stay explicitly acknowledging the issue, but putting a little bit of the onus so that whatever the issue is can be addressed.
I mean, you could put something like, I don't know that I would make them come beforehand and ask for accommodations, but could you say something like accommodations shall be granted for those who cannot stand to be recognized?
I like that approach. That way it puts in it puts in an absolute requirement and expectation that accommodations have to be made, but it doesn't state the order or manner in which how it's done, because that's going to be specific to the situation.
Yeah.
Mhm. Okay.
And I think that will work well. As a matter of course, I'll reach out to the Commission on Disability Issues and see if they have any specific wording on that they suggest as well. Others, thoughts, feedback?
No, that sounds good.
I like the language. I'm just wondering who would be in charge of making sure those accommodations are provided.
As a matter of course, it would be the moderator who's in charge of the meeting.
Right.
Because the person would have, if they had a problem, the problem would actually be with the moderator.
Mhm.
And then the moderator would have to contact Tom. And that becomes a whole separate issue.
I was thinking if someone goes to town meeting and they're not able to stand, they raise their hand, the microphone would have to be brought to them.
Yep.
What's the infrastructure for making sure that there's someone to do that? I'm trying to think of who would do that in that situation. Just so if this passes, that the change can be made to the infrastructure of the town meeting so that it's handled that way.
From a technology perspective, the locations where town meeting has recently been held have the ability to do that. The town owns the equipment for that.
And we could tell the moderator that this has been a change. So if he sees someone raise their hand, he can simply say, would you like a microphone brought to you? And I'm sure that Media Services has the ability to have the microphone brought to them. Because I know we've had floating microphones at town meeting.
Good point. Really good point. I'll also contact the moderator on that one, just to see if he's got any suggestions as well. $36.5. Any other comments on 36.4 before we go on? Moves us over to motions to amend or fill blanks. These are when there's numbers that need to be specified in case of motions or amend to fill blanks. The one expressing the largest sum or the longest time shall be put first. An affirmative vote shall be a negative vote on any smaller sum or shorter time. So if there is a vote to spend, say, $1,100,000 on trash, and someone else puts forth a vote to spend $1 million on trash, and the 1,100,000 passes, that automatically will take precedence. And for what it's worth, we have seen that case actually take effect. Saw that actually with the library a few years ago, where the library budget was increased to, I believe it was to pay for the chair coverings. Any questions on this? Thoughts, feedback? 36.6, the procedure for motions. No motions shall be received and put until they are seconded, and all motions shall be reduced to writing by the person making them when so requested by the moderator. In practice, our moderator requires all motions of significance to be reduced to writing, anything that's non-procedural. Procedural motions in practice, he doesn't require, such as a motion to adjourn. He doesn't require that to be put into writing. But if someone wants to make an amendment to a motion, it has to be put into writing. In practice, that person usually will go down to the desk, talk with whoever happens to be the legal counsel, usually Tom, and make sure that it is written down, handed then usually from Tom to Betsy or someone in between. They then get to Betsy, who then hands it to the moderator, and then it's allowed to be read by the person making the motion. That's the process that the town has gone through in the process. So I think that's the process that is outlined here. We could make it where motions don't have to be seconded or put other components in. I haven't seen much of a problem with this. There have been cases where motions have failed seconds, in which case the discussion on them is moot. Questions, updates? Moving along, 36.7, declaration of votes. Count by tellers. This is actually one that becomes interesting. The moderator shall declare all votes. And if 7 or more voters present a count, then there shall be tellers that are appointed by the moderator. The moderator does the appointment ahead of time at the very beginning of the meeting. If you are there for the very first minutes of the meeting, he swears them all in, usually right as the meeting is starting, so that they are working under an oath to fulfill their duties appropriately. But this allows, if in the case of a closed vote, any 7 or more voters can request a count on any item. In practice, at least for the last 20 years, the last couple of moderators, I've seen that if basically anyone asks for a vote, that it is granted in practice. But technically, this can require up to 7. That way, if there's a vote that is overwhelming and you can't have 1 or 2 people just become naysayers to extend a meeting for the sake of extending it. That's my understanding of the purpose behind this. I don't know of any particular reason for the number 7 in here. Thoughts? 36.8, motions permitted when a question is under debate.
So I'm sorry, Dan,
Yep.
before we leave 36.7, I don't have any problem with the 7 voter requirement for questioning the count. In fact, I think there's a statute to that effect. But we might want to consider whether to have a bylaw that allows the moderator to call a 2/3 vote without counting it. There's a statute, chapter 39, section 15, that says if a 2/3, 4/5, or 9/10 vote of a town meeting is required by statute, the count shall be taken and the vote shall be recorded in the records by the clerk. Provided, however, that a town may decide by bylaw or vote not to take account and record the vote if a 2/3 vote of a town meeting is required by statute. And provided further that if the vote is unanimous, account need not be taken and the clerk shall record the vote as unanimous. So in a way, I've always, as somebody who was himself the victim of this bylaw, I mean, I screwed up a vote early in my tenure as town council because I wasn't aware of this statute. It seems like it's a kind of trap for the unwary. And you can avoid the problem entirely with a simple bylaw.
So what you're saying is that if there's a vote and it's 90, say, 98-2, in just for exact numbers, and instead of having to where it's very obvious more than 2/3, but it's because it's, say, a zoning article, right now we have to go ahead, take the time to do the vote. This could happen. But if, let's say, the vote were 70-30 and 7 voters said we want to count, then they would still have to do the count.
Even if it was 98-2, if 7 voters say they want to count, you have to do it. But in the run of cases where it's pretty clear how the meeting voted, if the moderator, you can speed up the process by having the moderator just call the vote, even if it's a 2/3 or higher vote.
Thoughts?
I like this as someone who's is a teller often. When you have 2 people vote opposite the entire body on a 2/3 vote, you have to then go through the counting of the votes based on the rules we have now.
Yeah.
I have, we don't know who's going to be moderator in the future. I know that at least the moderators I've worked with take their job so seriously and they have training, so they would never call something 2/3 if it was even remotely close. But the fail-safe is if it looks close and the moderator calls it 2/3, I guarantee 7 people will pop up and question that. So I feel like there's a fail-safe if the vote is, if they call a 2/3 vote that seems like it should have a counted vote.
What comes to mind here is, and I agree with the efficiency of allowing the moderator to make the call. I think that when they make that call, it may need to be in bylaw, that they specifically remind that if 7 or more voters wish to have it counted, that they just mention it at that time. I deem that this has been a 2/3 vote. If 7 or more voters wish to have an exact count, please indicate now. Something along those lines, so that it doesn't silence dissenting voices without people making people feel minimized. That's why I'm just thinking that if we do that, if we put in that requirement for things that are still obvious, it reminds people about the 7 or more items. So people say in the time, because many people don't know all of these rules, that it would then be a good reminder. And if it's really 98 to 2, they're unlikely to get 7 people to say, yes, we actually want to go through this.
Yeah.
And we have seen that a number of times where it's 1 to 3 people that are dissenting largely on ceremonial grounds. And I don't mean to minimize their votes. It's a matter of making sure that they don't slow. They can show that it's not unanimous, and that part will be there.
Dan,
Yep.
one point. The whole purpose here is to avoid traps for the unwary.
Mhm.
And I think you're creating one if we were to write into the bylaw that every time the moderator calls a 2/3 or higher vote, he has to remind the meeting about the 7 person rule. Let's say you have a very clear, almost unanimous vote in favor of a bond issue. And the moderator doesn't think to remind the meeting that 7 persons could challenge his count. Bond counsel is going to need to know before they approve the bond issue that the moderator did that. And if they look back into the records and see that it wasn't said, then we have to go back and do the town meeting all over again.
I'm trying to figure out how we can make sure that people get the knowledge of the 7 votes. If we're going to put in the challenge, because it's a way to protect the loud minority when it's not singletons. And it could be something, it may be in a different section that just says that in the instructions for the meeting, that this section shall be included or something along those lines.
Can it be published in the booklet?
That's my thinking. It would be perfectly appropriate. I just want to make sure that that's not a discretion as to whether it gets published. If we're going to invoke it, or that it gets stated, at the beginning, once in the meeting or something along those lines. Because I hear Tom's concern. The flip side of it is if people don't know about the 7 people rule, it will very quickly have a chilling effect on the minority dissension, which sometimes can become very important to understand issues. And so I'm just trying to figure out how we can make sure that the education of that is there. I would think that the booklet would be sufficient.
Well, that only works with the annual town meeting because we have a booklet for that. And all the other town meetings, we just have a single sheet. So it's no easy feat.
Yeah.
We were going to reproduce the entirety of chapter 36 to do so other than with the annual town meeting. I've also got to say, I'm less interested in preserving the preserving the opportunity for meddlesome gadflies to waste the time of the rest of us. I think the biggest concern I have about town meeting is there are people there who have to get up for work the next day and who are paying babysitters and who are just dead on their feet tired. And I've always resented people who belabor the obvious. I get more cantankerous as I get older.
I'll reserve comment.
Yeah.
We'll enjoy that debate over a beverage at some point.
I'm just lucky I don't have to cover my face sitting in the front of the meetings when people talk. I can hide in the crowd now. So I'm with Tom.
Unless you're still as the teller.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So others' thoughts? Tim, Kevin, Joe, Lucy, Catherine?
I like the efficiency argument, but I do think there are a lot of people who attend who don't know all of the rules and could use a reminder in some way of what their rights are during the meeting. Even if it's just, Dan, like you said, something stated at the very beginning as a reminder.
Just a thought, and maybe it becomes a new section to, or a new bylaw that gets added to the section. It just says that in the publishing or information about the meeting itself, it provides a link or instructions back to the bylaws and any other information that the town deems helpful. So that way it's a reminder to people that, hey, there are actually governing rules. I think that might actually help the issue. And it requires a little bit of initiative by people, but not a whole lot. It could be that it's providing a link to, at the moment, it would be the eCode website where these are hosted. But it could also provide, links to the Robert's Rules of Order and other information. Because I think that the idea of education becomes important, but without becoming overly burdensome. Because then it's not specific to just this particular section, it becomes more instructive that, hey, there are actually rules overall, and that could speed up things and have people who just want to be troublesome. If they really want to be troublesome, they'll know the ways to do so. And if they can get the necessary people to do so, means that that there's an issue of some substance. But if it's only a couple of people, there won't be enough substance to actually take action. So I'm thinking if there's something that we can do that would codify it without being expensive or otherwise, and leaving the discretion of how that education gets done, but providing a link or other information, so that when people see the warrant or otherwise, it might just be even a simple statement that this meeting is held consistent with Chapter 36 bylaws or something like that. See the town website for more information. Tom, thoughts on that? And that way we could make the modification that you're suggesting in Section 7 and other modifications without having to worry about, okay, people don't have the ability to know. Because every time there's a meeting, they will be reminded, at least in some way.
Okay, so what addition would you want to make to these bylaws to do that?
It would likely be, could either be Section 17 that's reserved, or it could be a new Section 20 that would just state a reference to the way town meetings are run, including these bylaws, be included with warrants and other information about the meeting. Other published information about the meeting.
In a prior section, when we talked about publications, how we publish, the
warrant of the notice itself,
Yeah.
36.2.
So could that,
Should just be added to this section, I think is
don't know,
that where you're
could it?
going?
Yeah, could you just say, notice of every town meeting shall be given by posting the attested copy of the warrant, including the rules for annual town meeting, section 36. You know, the posting can reference section 36. I don't know, Tom, is that too cumbersome?
Well,
Oh,
I think for the reasons we discussed earlier, it would be too cumbersome to reproduce the entirety of chapter 36 in every warrant. But a reference to somewhere in every warrant to the fact that we have that our town meetings are conducted in accordance with the rules set forth in chapter 36. I suppose we could do that easily enough.
Right, we wouldn't have to reproduce that.
Right.
As long as we give the citation, people who are interested can look at that.
Yeah.
And that may need to be part of section 36.2 and or it could be even a new section.
Yeah.
Or one of the reserved ones, because I would expect it to be in both the notice, the warrant, as well as any published material. So if there's a town booklet, that would be in that booklet as well. And it'd probably just be a single sentence with the turgidity that Tom was talking about earlier. But I think that gets to the issue of the education. And with that, I think the idea of modifying 36.7 to your suggestion, Tom, to allow for 2/3 votes, I think makes a lot of sense. Others' thoughts? A lot of silence. Motions permitted when a question is under debate. So Tom, if you can work on those pieces.
Yeah.
When a question is under debate, no motion shall be in order except to adjourn, lay on the table the previous question, postpone to a day certain, commit, amend, postpone indefinitely, which several motions shall have precedence in the order herein named. What I think this is getting at is that once there is a question, you can't then have another question about I want to take something out of order. It's to prevent distracting questions that are truly motions of that are separate from points of privilege and other components that a person always has the right to make. In practice, I've not seen this to be a problem. I think that this actually has helped keep order so that when people have tried to bring questions in at the wrong time, the current moderator and the prior one were both really good at instructing people as to, okay, I think I get what you're trying to do, and this is how you have to do it and when you have to do it. The other part of this is it prevents a motion for reconsideration while something else is under debate. Because we're amongst a few places where we have a whole reconsideration section. So any questions on 36.8? Comments, thoughts? 36.9, time limit. On motions to adjourn, lay on the table, or take from the table, no person shall speak more than 2 minutes at a time. This is specified, does not specify a person can only speak once. That's it. But they are limited to 2 minutes. And this is for very specific motions as to what to do for a particular element. And specifically, it's interesting that lay on the table is here, where you have 2 minutes, which is different than the town meeting general speaking limit, which is in 36.11. So if someone wants to lay something on the table, there's a shorter time limit for it. I've not seen this to be a problem, but it prevents people from doing ineffective filibuster in reality. Questions, thoughts, feedback?
Yeah,
36.
I think
Go
this
ahead.
is actually more generous than than Robert's rules allows. I mean, in a lot of towns, when you bring a motion for the previous question, there's no debate on it.
Agreed. And Robert's rules doesn't require debate. This is saying that it allows for it. I haven't seen this to be a problem.
No,
To the point where I don't think there's a need to touch this one.
no, I agree.
So 3610, form and adoption of questions. Previous questions, this one's kind of funny in the way that it's worded. So this one, Tom, you may need to put on your powdered wig again. So the previous question shall be put in the following form. Shall the main question be now put? I've never heard anyone do that, including you, Tom,
Yeah.
at any town meeting. But I have heard I move the question.
This
Until the
reminds me of Winston Churchill. Somebody once upbraided him for his bad grammar because he ended a sentence with a preposition, and he said, "Now, this is errant pedantry, up with which I will not put."
That's a great quote of.
Yeah, that's fine.
Any questions on 3610? This is basically just putting in language as to how to get a question, the vote on a question itself, and that's really what it's talking about. So immediately after taking and adopting the previous question, the sense of the meeting shall be taken upon any pending amendments, and finally upon the main question. So the only question I have in here is, should we put a alternate form as long as it's acceptable to the moderator? Because otherwise someone could challenge a vote because the wording was not exactly as stated in the bylaw. Shall the main question be now put?
It's awful.
You're right. Nobody has ever said that since the 19th century. And the way people do talk at town meeting is, I move the question. So the second quote is right. What you might do is just delete shall the main question be now put, or, and after I move the question, say, or something substantially similar.
I think that doing that would be to our benefit. So that if they were to say, can we move the question? Instead of I move the question, we don't get into someone trying to challenge something, to your point, a bond issue or something, because the question wasn't worded exactly as stated in the bylaws. So the favor that I have, Tom, is when we present this, if you can actually have your robe and your wig, so you can at least once in town meeting state, shall the main question be now put, even if it's in the removal.
And I'll insist on being addressed as my lord. I'll have you know. So,
Not a problem, Barrister Mullen. We can accommodate that.
all right.
All right.
Other questions, thoughts? Okay, 3611. Person speaking on questions, time limit. No person shall speak upon a question more than once when any other person desires to be heard, or more than twice for more than 5 minutes at one time without the permission of town meeting. This basically gives anyone, this also applies to the proponent of an item as well. In practice, typically presentations are put before questions to get around this. So that if there is a presentation required, it's a presentation and then the question gets put, and that way the debate on the question, whatever it is limited to 5 minutes. This is something that has been modified a few times seems to work well in practice. It allows everyone to be heard. It allows opinions to be heard, including dissenting opinions, and then things move on quickly. And only a few times has the moderator had to actually use the 5 minutes. Sometimes I've seen him give a little bit of discretion over that, but usually not much. Thoughts?
I think it works.
3612. Not counting Zoom interruptions. No person speaking shall be interrupted by but a call to order. Is basically just maintaining order so that we don't get people inherently doing points of privilege and other things without cause. Technically, a point of privilege can be made at any time, including as an interruption, but if it gets abused, this would give the moderator cause for action. That's my reading of it. (3613) is one that will affect us. It'll affect everyone in this group. No reports of committees, including this committee, shall be in order unless made under an article in the warrant which indicates the subject to be reported upon. In other words, we can't have a report on, say, a school unless there's an article that talks about it. This is the prevention of surprises. Questions, thoughts, interruptions, committee reports? Any interruptions on that?
All good.
Action on committee reports. This one also affects us. When a final report of a committee is placed in the hands of the moderator, it shall be deemed to be properly before the meeting for its action, and a vote to accept the same shall discharge the committee, but shall not be an equivalent to carry out its recommendation without a special vote to adopt it. So what this is basically saying, is my reading, is that there are typically 2 votes, depending upon what a committee, including our own, comes up with. So 1 vote is on our final report and basically says that we shall, that there's an action to accept it. It's kind of a perfunctory vote. I've never seen it where there's a rejection of it, but there could theoretically be a rejection. But once that vote is done, we are discharged. Once we hand a final vote, because once we place that in the hands of the moderator, it shall be deemed before the meeting. And then once the vote is done, we can walk away and we will have completed our service. That will hopefully happen in the next couple of years. We're hoping. I think that's realistic. But it's also stating that there should be a separate vote for any recommendation. So we will probably have a bunch of articles that we will put forth. Those will be separate articles. So if there is a recommendation such as addressing the town council as my lord, that would have to be a separate vote from the acceptance of the committee report, even if he happens to be with a wig and robe at that time. Do I have that correct? Questions, thoughts? 3615. This is one that has caused many exciting times at town meeting. Is very unique to Wakefield reconsideration, the way that it's worded. If at a meeting of 1 or more sessions, a motion has been once made and voted upon, such a motion shall not be again considered at that meeting. What's often called a motion for reconsideration. You cannot, what this says, you cannot have reconsideration at the same session. But if there is a suspension of the meeting, so the meeting is held on a different date, then a motion for reconsideration can be taken, provided that you have a 2/3 vote, subject to all the provisions of the charter concerning written notice filed with the clerk. So the person who wants to challenge a vote has to first file it with the clerk with their intention to have a reconsideration vote. They do not have to actually then have the reconsideration vote. They can file the motion with the clerk. We've seen this a couple of times, and then they choose not to have the reconsideration vote. A reconsideration vote, which requires 2/3, means to take the question and vote on it again. It does not mean that just because it's reconsidered that the vote is overturned. It means that you're just bringing the issue back. But if it has been voted and then reconsidered, you can't vote on it a third time. So this says you can have a second bite at the apple, but you cannot have a third, is my reading of it. It seems to actually be, at this point, pretty tight in its wording. This has been used a number of times for, especially for spending articles, controversial spending articles. If a meeting gets dissolved, then the vote for reconsideration or the motion for reconsideration becomes a moot point. Questions, thoughts?
Tom, is this something that a lot of other municipalities have?
No, I think our charter provision for reconsideration is unique.
I'm not aware of any other community that has a specific explicit reconsideration motion.
So it's in the charter as well as in the bylaws.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I was wondering, what does this add to the charter? And it seems to me it adds two things. First, doesn't really add, but it makes absolutely clear that you cannot have a reconsideration motion at the same session where the underlying vote was taken. That's implicit in the charter, but it's not expressed. Here, we're explaining it.
Okay.
And that's useful. And then the second thing is it makes clear, and I don't think this is really necessary because I think that the rules of parliamentary procedure deal with it, but it makes clear that you can't have more than one reconsideration vote.
Okay.
Oh, no, a lot of towns have reconsideration. It's just that what's unique in Wakefield is you have to file something with the town clerk. You can't do a reconsideration on the same night as the
Okay.
in the same session as the underlying vote.
It's section 29G1 for anyone who is trying to look up where this is in the charter itself. And it implies everything the Tom was stating, such as if someone wants to have the motion, they actually have to make it an adjourned session. So a different session, but 3615 makes it very clear what that process is. I think that personally, I find it helpful to be in languages a little bit clearer than what's in the charter for this. Any questions on this? If we want to make changes here of significance, I think we need to make a charter change most likely as well, depending upon what the change is. 3616, rules of practice. Conduct of all town meetings not prescribed by law, by the charter, wasn't sure, or by the rules set forth in this chapter shall be governed by the latest edition of Robert's Rules of Order, so far as they are adapted to town meetings, and the latest edition of town meeting time shall be used as an interpretive guide. So for those of you who don't have a copy of the trusty, I know that Tom, you've got this handy, town meeting time guide. I don't know why I have this, but I do. It's one of those interesting books that talks about Massachusetts law and town meetings and how they actually operate. This basically says you've got Robert's Rules of Order, but where there's a conflict, town meeting time can be used as an authoritative source to resolve it, is my reading of it. In the end, it still comes down to the moderator's discretion and decision in almost every case. If someone doesn't like or know Robert's Rules of Order, highly recommend that you get a copy of it, either online, Amazon, or some other place, and spend a lot of time reading. It will require a lot of coffee. It's very useful for managing large groups. It can also be very cumbersome reading as well. Many sections do not apply to the way meetings are held in Wakefield.
I should point out there is a Robert's Rules for Dummies. I'm serious, I have one.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's much more intelligible.
Did you reconsider it?
Yeah.
Okay, 3617 was repealed. 3618, offers of land or building, the duty of the planning board. This is actually an interesting one. What this does is this says that anything that is dealing with town, when that deals with land or land for buildings or parks, the planning board shall consider the proposal and hold a public hearing with whatever notice it deems reasonable. And it shall make its recommendations to the town meeting. Such an article shall be placed only in the annual town meeting warrant unless the town council considers it especially urgent, then it may be done in a special town meeting. There are a couple of things here that I find a bit striking. The idea of having the planning board give a recommendation on anything that deals with land, I think makes a lot of sense. There's no prescription for how or when the planning board needs to take action. And this has become, it has been an issue in the past where the planning board has intentionally been slow to have meetings and hearings so that things are not ready for a town meeting. And that can effectively kill certain articles, depending upon what the article is. So it actually puts a lot, it puts the ability to have an effective filibuster on anything dealing with land in the hands of the planning board itself. And where the second section on that, it's specific to the annual town meeting, so that would be the spring town meeting. Unless town council considers it urgent, town council determines when all articles are. So I think that part is a bit moot. I'm wondering if we should put something in here that says the town planning board shall consider such proposal with respect to the possibilities within some time period. It might be within 60 days or 90 days, so that it doesn't give them an effective filibuster just by not holding that hearing.
Dan, I'm not necessarily opposed to that, but I just want to speak up in favor of deleting the last sentence. Such an article shall be placed only in the annual town meeting warrant unless the town council considers the matter especially urgent. Then it may be acted on at a special town meeting. I mean, there are a couple of problems with that. One is if we have an opportunity to accept land that is offered to the town for park purposes, why on earth would we not take it up as quickly as possible? And you're just, again, we're just creating traps for the unwary when we say that a particular kind of article can be considered only at this and not at other town meetings. And second, this is kind of inartfully written because it says it's either at an annual town meeting or a special town meeting. Well, in Wakefield, we have a third category, which is the regular town meeting in the fall. The answer that I think is very easy is just delete the last sentence.
Thoughts?
I agree. Why make it harder to accept land or buildings? So if we just say recommendations to the town meeting, we can choose whatever town meeting is coming before us.
Yeah.
Agree.
I tend to agree with that as well. Removing the last sentence. And I think just putting in some sort of timer and it should be a long timer to give planning board discretion, and it could be, within 90 days or something is what I'm thinking, just so if they don't like an offer of land or they don't like a park for whatever reason, they don't have the ability to block it.
I like that idea.
Yeah, I support that as well.
Tom, is that something you can draft up?
Sure. What period of time would you think appropriate?
My initial thinking is 90 days. Other thoughts?
Dan, I'm sorry, is the 90 days for the holding of a public hearing? I zoned out a moment. Okay,
They have to hold the public hearing within 90 days within that they get the notice itself.
okay.
So they can effectively defer it in Wakefield for one town meeting, but that's it.
Okay.
Mhm.
And 90 days also should be enough time realistically for anything that happens if an offer comes in the beginning of June to give them time to plan for summer meetings as may be required. Or if it comes in, June 28th, it gives time. So there 60 days would require it to be over the summer. 90 days gives them at least one non-summer month. There are ways that they could be very creative to cause additional problems, but that's a little bit separate. Other questions, thoughts? Do you know the last time the town was actually offered land or buildings where this section was specifically affected? I know we've offered land for sale. I'm trying to think of when we've actually accepted land.
I can tell you there are several times when this kind of thing happens that it wouldn't go to town meeting at all, because the Conservation Commission can accept grants of land without town meeting approval, with the approval only of the Board of Selectmen, which in our case is called the Town Council.
Thank you. And the last section for this evening, 3619, annual financial town meeting, exactly what Tom was mentioning. We have two different types of town meetings. We have our annual town meeting, and then we've got our financial town meeting, which is according to this, held the first Monday of November in each year. And I'm thinking we may want to change the timing of this as well to be, it shall be held within 30 days of the first Monday of November each year, something along those lines to give discretion to the town council, because we have had times where we have to move it for a variety of reasons. Anything from adjusted elections. I remember one time we had I believe we had a weather event years ago.
Tom, Dan, I'm just hesitating on setting this without talking to Steve Mayo, town administrator, because Tom, do I have a memory of Steve having issues about the timing of something because when the budget from the state is delivered, or am I making that up?
Yeah, I'd be in favor of just deleting 3619 entirely.
Okay.
Because the charter gives discretion to the town council to hold it within 30 days of the first Monday in November, which is fine. That's usually ample time for us. And if it weren't in a particular case, we could just hold a special town meeting, later, like in December. But this adds nothing to what's in the charter, except to the extent that right now it's inconsistent with the charter. It says it has to be on the first Monday in November. So I just say strike the whole thing.
Which that would be consistent with striking it in 36.1 as well, or 30.
Well,
30.
36.1 deals with this dichotomy between the election and the annual town meeting. And so that's a useful thing to establish. And we say, and the annual town meeting will be held at the time set in the charter. So, but here we've got nothing, no predicate reason to bring up the annual financial town meeting here. See, in 36.1, we didn't actually just strike the sentence about when the annual town meeting would occur. We said it'll be held on a date selected pursuant to the charter. I think either we strike 36.19 or we say the annual financial town meeting shall be held on a date pursuant to the charter.
I'm wondering if we do the latter option, because that, from an education perspective, helps people realize that Wakefield does have 2 town meetings.
Yeah.
And where the charter says that it can be set in bylaw, we have a bylaw where it could be then readily changed in the future if there was a need. We have that placeholder that's readily available. So the words don't mean a whole lot, but the placeholder, I think, holds value.
Yeah. Okay.
That's my 2 cents. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think that makes sense because we're talking about town meetings.
Yeah.
Other thoughts? Okay, with that, we can be done with chapter 36 for now. There's a few different things here. Tom's got a lot of work, so he'll have some fun drafting up articles. So we'll go before town meeting about town meeting. So we'll have to have meetings to talk about the meetings for town meeting, but we'll get to that at another time. A couple of other quick things for the professional assistants. This is the update about Mark Dabrowski. Tom, if you can give a quick update as to where we are. I believe he had sent over a proposal and wasn't sure if there was any additional update.
So yeah, I solicited input from the Mass Municipal Law Association, the lawyers who represent municipalities throughout the state, and everybody said the same thing. The guy you've got to go to is Mark Dabrowski. I emailed him and asked him if he would give us a proposal. He looked at our bylaws and said they're generally in pretty good shape, and he would be happy to recodify our zoning bylaws for $48,000. No, I'm sorry.
45,000.
45,000. And he gave us an example of an agreement he had with another town, the town of Holbrook. He had charged them 48,000. I can tell you he did this in Linfield, and I think he charged Linfield 50,000. So it may be because Linfield zoning bylaws were in much worse shape when he undertook that assignment than our zoning bylaws are.
So in looking at the draft agreement, and if anyone wants a copy of it, happy to make it, happy to send it to you. There were some limitations that and expectations that he was setting, such as that he would meet with the board 4 times, meet with this committee 4 times, but it was only 4 times. It was the expectation for all of zoning, and given the tenacity that this group tends to approach things, I think that that's a bit understating the work that will be required. He also said that he'll attend town meeting. That part I think makes complete sense. I just want to make sure that any agreement has the ability to have effectively overtime or not in a legal sense, but the ability to be adjusted if necessary, if he finds that the work is a bit more detailed than he expected. Because I suspect that as we get into the zoning bylaws, there will end up being a lot of questions, and it will end up being a very slogging process for us.
So Dan, I think a couple of things. One is if we go back to him and say, we don't want to limit ourselves to 4 meetings, he's going to say, okay, then we can agree. This is the fixed price for up to 4. If you want more than 4, then each meeting will be at a separate, at an additional price of X. And second, I strongly suspect he's going to say, beyond 4 meetings, you get my associate, you don't get me. Because he's a busy guy and I don't see him coming out to all of our meetings.
My thinking on that is both of those probably make sense, because he's, I'm sure, going to have associates do a substantial amount of the initial legwork and that he will supervise and review, and to have, and it could just be that associates come to most of the meetings anyways, if that's the expectation. That just wasn't clear in the initial legal agreement that I saw. And I just want to make sure that we're not putting ourselves in a position where we can't have the input from the town, because once people realize that we're really talking about recodifying zoning bylaws, I expect that there will be a lot of public input from a lot of different stakeholders that the bylaws affect. So that's where I just want to make sure that we have the necessary pieces in the agreement so that there isn't a mismatch of expectations.
So actually, I think he is contemplating that he would personally attend up to 4 meetings with us at our discretion. That is, it's our choice if we want fewer than 4. That's how I read the contract. It's personal to him. But I'm anticipating that if we wanted more than that, he'd say life's too short. That's why God made associates.
And I personally, I think that would be just fine. And you know, you don't have enough associates as it is anyways, because you attend all these meetings yourself. So and I met some of your associates and they're fantastic. So I think that this group will be well served by an associate when necessary. It's just to make sure that we have access to it, and that we're not limited in the expertise to those, so that it doesn't fall back on you to try and backfill those pieces, because these meetings are likely to become extensive. So if you can have the discussion, I'm not sure what the language needs to look like, just so that the expectation is that we have access to the legal the legal expertise, whether it's from him or his team, I think will be adjustable. And to have him personally at 4 meetings makes sense. We'll probably want him at the very first meeting to help us with process, and then periodically if there's very thorny issues. And where town meeting appropriated $50,000 for this process, I'd be delighted to not spend the full 50,000 if it's not needed. But there's also the need to make sure that we do a proper recodification. And if we need to, supplement that, if we have to go back to town meeting, we can do that as well. To me, it's more important that we initially set up the contract for success than try to be cheap and have to have an amendment later. That puts everyone in a situation where no one wants to be.
Right.
Others' thoughts?
Can we take it out of order, the zoning? I mean, do we have to go in order? Should we get a list together of the major topics to start with, so he's aware of it? And then do the other items when he's not around or his associates around, or should we do it that way, or are we gonna just do it in order?
We will probably get advice. I would expect we will get advice and counsel from him on how to best approach that.
Tom, will he review our bylaws and then call for a meeting or? Okay,
He's already looked at our bylaws.
Okay,
I asked him to do that, and it was on that basis that he gave us the quote that he did. But I think what he'd do, trying to remember how he handled Linfield, would be to meet with us to get a feel for what we're looking for, what our priorities are, if there are any big problems that we want to address. And then he's going to go back to his office and come up with something that hopefully is incorporates what we want and is maybe a little more, I don't know, intuitive or better organized, whatever, and then send it out to us.
Dan, does it make sense for us as a committee to review the zoning bylaws prior to meeting with him, so we can ask, we have a basis of knowledge to making comments, to asking pointed questions, as opposed to us learning along with him? Do you know what I'm saying? Even if it's a review together, a cursory review, so we know what we're getting into.
I think it would make sense for each person to read through as much of the zoning bylaws as you can handle.
Mhm.
And I state it that way because it's extraordinarily dense.
Yeah.
And it's complex. I think for us to try and go through it multiple times would be unwieldy for all of us,
Okay.
both individually and as a committee. So I think where this is something that he does on a regular basis, we'll get benefit of his counsel as to how to do it effectively and efficiently.
Got it. That makes perfect sense.
So, and then what is the timing, Tom, for engaging once there's an agreement that seems to meet all of these different pieces? Is that something that the town council has to authorize? What is the process for that? You'd mentioned at the last meeting, it doesn't have to go through the regular full purchasing process. Wasn't sure who has to authorize those pieces, or is that something that is our town council, you or town barrister, you get to sign on it?
So I think I would look to the town council, CIL, to vote to approve Mark Dabrowski as our contractor, and to authorize somebody, could probably Steve Mayo, to sign the contract with him. And I'd look over this contract further with you, Dan, and with Steve. And when we're all satisfied with it, ask Dabrowski to sign.
I think that sounds like a good process. Feedback, thoughts from others?
Can you just spell his last name, please?
Yeah, sure. That's capital B-O-B as in boy,
Yeah.
R-O-W-S-K-I.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
So with that, we've got our next meeting is scheduled for October 17th, 2 weeks from tonight. Next weekend is Town Day. As of now, we don't have anyone who has said they really want to have a table there, which is perfectly fine, because I don't think the bylaws is going to be a particularly exciting topic for most people at Town Day, although it is certainly an exciting topic, as you've just spent 2 hours going over 1.5 chapters. So it's just the way this stuff actually goes. So Town Day coming up this weekend, highly recommend if you have the ability to go to it. Should be a lot of fun, should be an interesting experience. And then Wakefield 101, for those who are new to town, is going to be on October 20th. And for anyone who's new to town, should have gotten an invitation from the Chamber of Commerce. It'll be held at the AmeriCal Civic Center. And if anyone on this committee is already knowing that you're going to be there, then love to have you, explain what the committee is doing. Otherwise, I will work to see if we can have someone there, just because for people who are new to town, it may be beneficial for them to realize that, oh, hey, there are actually town bylaws and they're up for discussion. So where Wakefield has this kind of magical thing of massive amounts of citizen involvement in government, people who come to Wakefield don't realize how open and easy it is to join, as all of you have now done. And it's something that can become very beneficial. So if any of you do find that you're going to that, please feel free, drop me a note. If you want to go as a representative, again, drop me a note. Happy to delegate that piece out. Any other topics?
Which chapters will we cover on the 17th?
For the 17th, we've gone through 36 at this point. We will again revisit chapter 9 if there's additional feedback, which hopefully we will get. I have reached out to the Permanent Building Committee in particular, because there are some conflicts with the current operating procedures of the Permanent Building Committee and the way that chapter 9 is specified. So I'm hoping that we will have feedback for chapter 9. Otherwise, the intent is to continue on, and we will hopefully be discussing chapter 51, and 51 is the annual report. So that's one that there's not a huge amount of content in it, but it's one that will probably be of interest. I know Eric Reed particularly loves this particular section. The annual report, if you haven't seen it, is printed every year. You can now get it online as well. But it has all sorts of interesting information about town. The one for 2022 will certainly have all of our names as people, or technically it'll be 2023. We'll have all of us, since we are volunteers with town. It has all of the committees, it has the budget, it has different activities that have occurred. So it's really interesting. The bylaw dictates what has to be in there, and then there's additional information that's optional. I will also plan on listing chapter 56, which is about the town council, and chapter 62 on the treasurer. These are very minor sections in terms of the content itself. And the goal will be to get through realistically these 3 sections. Hopefully that meeting won't last as long as this one did. So with that, for those who are celebrating Yom Kippur, wish you a Yom Tov. That starts tomorrow night at sundown and then continues on through Wednesday. And for those who are celebrating other upcoming holidays and festivals, hope you have a great one, including Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day, which is next Monday as well. Any other questions, thoughts? With that, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Ann did the very quick motion to adjourn. She wants to get out of here. Do we have a second?
Second.
Catherine seconded. She's quick on the draw. So with that, we have to do roll call. Ann,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Catherine,
Yes.
Lucy,
Yes.
and I vote in the affirmative. With that, we have a vote of 7-0 for adjournment. Tom, thank you very much for your sage counsel as always. We look forward
Thanks,
to seeing you with a robe and a robe and powdered wig. We do appreciate it, my lord. So we
Well,
appreciate
thank you.
all of your assistance, and hope that you're able to join us again at the next meeting on the 17th.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Take care.